I think I've transformed tremendously. 20 years ago, that self of me would not recognize this one. But it's been a lot of learning, knowing what I want, knowing what my non negotiables are, and then staying firm with it and having the confidence that if my non negotiables are not met, I'm not in a position where I have to just accept what's coming.
Hi, welcome to your next tech startup. I'm Isabel Rasmussen. Today I have engineering leader Manisha with me, and we will be speaking about her career journey, things that she's learned along the way. Most recently, you grew a team from 5 to over 70 engineers, so has a lot of experience with hiring, also growing in her career and learning lessons and translating that into being a hiring manager. When we had spoken offline, you had said how when you started your career in the United States, how that really had you think about yourself as a candidate in a way that maybe wouldn't have been the case if you had entered the job market at a different time, but you'd entered in 2008.
Yeah, I was one of the few people who knew what I wanted to do in high school. So I went to college to study computer science. This is back in India, not in the US. I was fortunate to have been hired by a startup at the time, right out of college. I worked there for several years. As life changed, my husband got an opportunity to move to the US right around the time of the 2008 recession. So I did follow him here, which was not ideal for my career in terms of, I was coming in from a new country with the recession. Finding jobs here was difficult. All of the experience that I had in India was essentially negated to a pretty, blank slate, and it was like I was starting from scratch. So despite having all the qualification, all of the experience, just because I was moving from a new country to Silicon Valley, it was quite difficult to find a position. It took me quite a while. I think that really did shape how I presented myself in interviews because of the challenges. I was less picky about what I wanted to do. I was more grateful to even have the opportunity to interview. And then, getting to offer stages, I didn't feel like I had the ability or the space to negotiate or ask for things or just be demanding, because I was just grateful I had an opportunity where I could work and where I could be part of an organization.
I'm used to being a recruiter in a very candidate driven market. And so at offer stage, people can ask for all sorts of things. But right now and in 2008, that was a very company driven market.
As a hiring manager, I've been on both sides of it, but also a hiring manager in both situations where it is a very candidate driven market as well as a very company driven market. But as a hiring manager, making those decisions because you've invested so much of your time, your team's time in looking for these candidates, and like you start out by looking for a candidate to fill out a role because you know that there is a need. So as a hiring manager, it is an extremely difficult decision to have to pull an offer because there was a last minute change in budget allocation, and now what the ability to hire is just not there anymore, because
Yeah.
you lose a good candidate. And especially a good candidate, even in today's market, I feel like has a lot of opportunities, not have that much the same kind of negotiation as before, as maybe 2 years back, but definitely opportunities to make an impact and do the kind of work that people want to do definitely still exist.
Have you ever considered or rescinded an offer based on the negotiation tactics of a candidate?
I have never. So for negotiation, the only time we've had to we decided not even to make a formal offer was when the candidate's asking was way higher.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, not hypothetical, but an example. This has happened at least a few times now, where initially a lot of candidates choose not to share their expected salaries, right?
Yeah.
They choose not to share what they're making or what they're hoping to get when they interview for a particular role at the beginning. So you're going in blind. And, when you get to that offer stage with candidates like that, then they make an ask which is completely outside the range that the company is able to provide. right? This, especially if they're coming from larger organizations, now applying in a startup, the salary ranges and total compensation packages are very, very different. And I think that in those cases, definitely it's been a challenge
Yeah.
because
I
we can
always try to push really hard, especially if I'm dealing with a candidate who has been at a FANG or something like that and they're interviewing. I only do startup hiring and I push hard. And granted, everything has also changed because that law in California and New York passed, maybe it's 2 years ago now, that the jobs have to have salary listings.
and that's beneficial, right?
Yeah.
I think that makes things easy from a hiring manager perspective, from a recruiter perspective, because then you're starting out with, hey, when you applied, you knew this was our
Yeah.
range. Like we cannot go beyond this.
Okay, back to the coming in during a recession, your career has grown a ton during that time. And then more recently, you just joined a company a few months ago. So
Mhm.
you went through interview, negotiation. What would you say are the biggest ways that you've transformed in that?
Oh my gosh, I think I've transformed tremendously. 20 years ago, that self of me would not recognize this one. But
Mhm.
it's been a lot of learning, knowing what I want, knowing what my non negotiables are,
Okay.
and then staying firm with it and having the confidence that if my non negotiables are not met, I'm not in a position where I have to just accept what's coming at me,
Right.
right?
And I'm
Uh,
assuming when you're saying your non-negotiables, you're not just talking about offer stage. You're
no, no,
really talking about the full interview process.
absolutely, absolutely.
So let's go kind of like early stage interviews. If you're comfortable sharing like one or two non-negotiables that
Sure.
like just when you're starting to talk to a company, what was important to you and how did you sort that out in those early interviews for yourself?
So, very early on, it was, when I started, because I was wanting to see what's out there, I
Mhm.
was still figuring out what my non negotiables were. So, I was talking to pretty much any company where I felt like my role would match what my expectations are. I had certain expectations of what I wanted to do. I definitely wanted to level up in my career. So, that's what I was looking for. I wanted
Let's
to,
try to get like a little more specific because we're talking about your most recent job search, right?
yeah, my most recent job search.
So you had come from managing a 70-person team. So you probably did you have two lines of management below you?
I'll talk through it. So
Okay.
70%, like that 70% team was back in 2022, 23, I would say. 2024, things started taking a downturn. I
Yeah.
shifted my role. I'd been at my previous company for 7 years. So I was doing different things and moving around in terms of responsibility and taking on different areas within the company. So I was working as a director of engineering there. And I
Mhm.
knew that for my next role, because I'd been doing pretty much by the time I left, I think I had managed every area of engineering that
Oh,
I
wow.
could in that company. So I was definitely looking for my next challenge where what I wanted to do was something that was new, which helped me learn something completely new, a new domain, a new area, but also somewhere where I could use the experience and expertise that I had built up over the years and apply that to help the company and be impactful and produce the outcomes that the company was expecting. So
Okay.
that was my starting point.
Okay.
Uh,
So it wasn't so much about like the team needs to be this big.
Yeah, I didn't sort of restrict myself to that. I kept it pretty open. Where I had not made up my mind was whether I wanted to go to another startup or a large organization. So when I was looking at positions, I knew for sure is I don't think I can go back to coding. Last year, when I was looking for jobs, a lot of director, senior director level roles were expecting people to be hands on. And
Which
that
an early
was
stage startup,
yeah,
that's
which is
like,
expected. Yeah.
yeah.
At certain companies, certain stages, definitely
Mhm.
that's a requirement. But I knew that that definitely was not for me.
Yeah.
And I was therefore exploring both opportunities of larger organizations and startups that were stable startups because,
Right.
I
Like more
being
like
an
mid to late
immigrant, I
stage.
didn't want to take too much of a risk with a startup as well. So
Mhm.
something like a Series C startup was what I was targeting. So, as I was interviewing both different types of companies, I realized that my interest As I was learning about the team, the work, and the impact I will be able to have in those different roles, I personally was very excited about the roles that I was talking to, or companies that I was talking to that were in the startup space. I realized that, with what I can do and the way I like to work, I like to be autonomous in terms of here's a big ball of problem, go and solve it. Perhaps I would not get those type of opportunities at a larger organization.
Okay.
Um,
And
that's
so let's go into, so you were interviewing at some of those larger organizations, and I'm guessing you were asking questions around role responsibilities and getting answers that were more around like maintaining. Is
not
that
maintaining. I think, there were definitely interesting challenges there,
okay?
but I felt like I would not be able to have as broad an impact
Okay.
as I would be able to have. Like it would be more deep, more depth than the breadth. And I think in my career, I've tended to focus more on the breadth. And, I have that ability to be able to take multiple different problems on and find solutions and, make changes where needed and make improvements. And I think the startup culture or a startup team lends more to those opportunities than a larger organization.
Yeah.
Nothing against larger organizations. This is,
I
yeah,
think it's an interesting, it totally makes sense that you went like Series C because, like, well, even though some Series C, I will say, directors are like sometimes hands-on. So it depends on the company and how they do things. But like I think like early stage, you're definitely hands-on. And then if you like breadth more than depth, then obviously like going like, you know, that IPO-ish space like is that gets complicated. So right in the middle, Series C is a good fit.
yeah, 100%. And then, so, and I have a lot of experience with that stage of startups with my last two roles being in similar stages when I joined. So definitely I have experience both as an engineer and as a leader in those type of companies. So that felt like my comfort zone, and I think I stayed within my comfort zone at least for now.
I would
Yeah.
guess that if you had focused heavily on team size, then the Series C would not have been a fit.
No, definitely not, right? The team that I inherited is less than 20. So
Mhm.
it's quite different from where I was coming from. But I enjoy that. It gives me an opportunity to know each person at an individual level. I'm able to be of service to my team at that individual level and be more close to them and be on the ground level with them when they need me, which at higher levels with lots of people, lots of layers in between would be a challenge. So for now, I enjoy that.
And I think when I'm interviewing directors of engineering for roles, the answer you just gave there of why it works for you, I'm like, oh, that is why I move people forward. Whenever you're hiring and you're talking to someone who is, there's a lot around overqualified stuff. But to me, it's not about being overqualified, it's about being happy in the role. If you were managing a 70-person team and I'm talking to you about a 6-person team for you, is that really what you want? You
Correct.
know, and the answer that you gave for those who are thinking about interviewing and things like that, that answer, and it is that two-way street of like that's what you want and what makes you happy, and that
Correct.
is what the role is, and finding that alignment, the non-negotiables there. It's so important to both sides. If the hiring process is being done well and the candidate is being true to themselves and what is really going to make them happy, then you'll get that alignment there.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical when you're going in to look for jobs and evaluating, as a candidate, you're evaluating the companies you're talking to. It is extremely important to think of yourself, place yourself in that situation, and figure out whether this is what helps you, give you that sense of accomplishment at the end of your day, at the end of your week. Are you going to feel satisfied doing what this company is offering you? If
Right.
not, like, ultimately it is the work that you'll be doing. And
Yeah.
I'll go back and say this, even from the very beginning, even when I didn't feel like I had the ability to negotiate my position, my role, my compensation, one thing that I was always very, very diligent about was finding a place where I feel I will be able to bring myself to give my all to the job that I'm at. I'm going to be spending more than 8 hours. Majority of your life is spent at work. If I'm not going to feel happy at the end of the day, if I'm not going to feel satisfied doing what I'm doing at the end of the day, is this really something that I want to continue pursuing? And if the answer was no, I would just not continue that conversation.
Even when you were kind of like coming from a place of like fear and, oh my gosh, am I going to get the job?
Yeah, for me, that was definitely it. Like I was okay to not get the compensation package that I at that point would have deserved, but I would not have been comfortable going into work. It would have been hard for me personally to wake up in the morning and show up to work not feeling motivated, not feeling excited about the work that I was doing. If that is not the case, what's the point?
I think that's such a great message for people right now who are freaking out, really understanding your negotiables and your non-negotiables. And for you at that time, the salary was more negotiable than the how you're going to be spending your 8 to 10 hours a day. And that's something that people thinking about early stage startups, if you want to experience everything that's involved in an early stage startup and you have been at a larger big tech company, like you can't have both. You are not going to get that crazy salary and the amazing early stage experience in one. And really being clear on what your trade-offs are. So now let's move to kind of more in your later stage interviews. Typically those are when you're talking to higher ups, like stakeholders. What are things that were non-negotiables that you had to kind of navigate through those later stage interviews?
So, in those later stage interviews, I focused more on, especially this last that I was looking for in the last group of interviews that I was doing. It was more my relationship or my presence and expectations that these higher level positions or my boss or my potential boss at that time
Mhm.
would have of me and whether we align on those. Also, through those conversations, although we're putting our best foots forward, it is, you can still see whether the conversation, it's an insight into how conversations are going to be in the future and whether this is a person that I want to continue to work with for a long time. So it was both soft evaluation of the camaraderie that I was having with the people that I was interviewing with, but also getting questions answered in terms of what their expectations were, whether they align with what I'm hoping to set and to work to have an output on those positions.
And then in regards to offer negotiations, what would you say, whether it be things that you've started to do that you weren't comfortable with doing before or that you would recommend for people?
I think one thing I'll start with is, I've always stayed very professional and very respectful. I think, we have to both on as a hiring manager and recruiter as well as a candidate, we have to maintain that level of professionalism, that level of respect for each other instead of becoming combative. Because if things work out, this is a company, this is the team you're going to work with. Like, why start off on a bad note? So
Yeah.
definitely, keeping the tone very, very professional, very respectful. I would hear the offer and then let them know, like, these are my non-negotiables. I'm always ready to take a step back and move away from the situation if those non-negotiables are not met. Right? I think that that is something that we always have to be ready for. Otherwise, we're just wasting each other's time, right?
Yeah. And
Ultimately,
has there been something, we talked about making sure you have salary alignment before you're getting at offer stage. So has there been a non-negotiable that you had you decline an offer?
yes, I have had to. It is extremely hard, especially the first time I had to do it. Because, like I said, coming from an experience of not having the confidence to walk away from offers just because of the situations I was in, the first time I did that, because I had a non negotiable that was not being met,
Are you
was
comfortable sharing
very
what the non-negotiable is?
in that situation, it was the role for me. I was expecting the role to have more breadth but this was a role that was going to almost pigeonhole me into a very specific area within the
Yeah,
company.
no, but that didn't come out till you're, like, at offer
That
stage?
didn't No, that sort of came out, or as the later stages of the interview was when I started learning more and more, because the way it
Oh,
was presented at the beginning was very different. And so it took me the entire interview cycle to get to that, to build that understanding. So when I
and is
started
that
having,
I'm assuming that's because there was misalignment amongst the hiring team, that expectations
I'm
of
not sure. I think it was also their elevator pitches, right? Like when they were talking about the role, to me it sounded, it could be completely my misunderstanding, right? I don't want to discount that. But I feel like it took me the entire interview process to understand that there is misalignment in the expectations that they have and what they envision for this role versus what I'm looking for my
okay.
next move.
Yeah,
So
and it's really great that you figured that out. I interview people in general who are unhappy at their current and they're looking for a move. They expect these certain things are going to happen and then they start the role. And this can be at like any size company. And then what that role is very different. It's so much better to do what you did and figure it out when you're interviewing and decide, I don't want to come here, because like short stints don't look good on your resume.
no.
And,
And
and
it's
so
not
then
something I want to do either, right? Like that
yeah,
was one of my non-negotiables. If I'm going to go somewhere, it's going to be for the long haul, right?
what you do differently now or what you'd recommend people are doing when they're thinking about negotiating.
Absolutely, reiterating what I've been saying very clearly, what your non negotiables are, where you're willing to negotiate. Be upfront and have those open conversations right from the get go with the interview team, with the interview panel. That clarity and that confidence, I believe, is what sets us apart and will help you or anybody who's interviewing, help a candidate be successful in not only getting what they're looking for in their next roles, but also helpful for the company that they're going to, because now you're best matched with each other in your next role, and you'll have the most impact, you'll have the biggest outcomes together.
Yeah, and clearly you've done a great job of that because you've gone to companies and have been there for a long time, so you matched well.
Convert.
Thank you so much for sharing, your experience as a candidate, as a hiring manager. And yeah, like I think more and more candidates really do need to work on identifying their non-negotiables because it makes them stronger candidates and allows them to more likely end up in a role that they're going to have long-term success in.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on this podcast, Isabel. It was really, really lovely talking to you.